And people coming in slowly. Okay, Dan, why don't you go ahead and start?
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us on at University Bookstore virtual event tonight. We are excited to present John Paul Brammer to celebrate his new book, Hola Papi, How to Come Out in a Walmart Parking Lot and Other Life Lessons. He will be in conversation tonight with Ray Corona. John Paul Brammer is an author, illustrator, and columnist from rural Oklahoma, currently living in Brooklyn. He runs the popular advice column Hola Papi on Substack. His work includes essays, short fiction, and illustration, and it has appeared in the Washington Post, Food and Wine, Catapult, Business Insider, and many, many more. He runs a print shop where he puts his artwork and designs, and you can find that online at olapopishop.com. He'll be in conversation with Ray Corona tonight, who is originally from Mexico City. Ray is a gay professional by day and activist by night who has called Seattle home since age 9. Ray's community and professional work has focused on providing access and building bridges among diverse communities. Ray was the first undocumented person to be appointed to the City of Seattle LGBTQ Commission, where he served a 2-year term. Most recently, Ray founded a new organization called Somos Seattle, whose mission is to foster LGBTQ Latinx individuals' development. Ray graduated from UW Bothell in 2013 and has been profiled by UW Magazine for his work with the Seattle Latinx Pride Festival. Just a few more things before we get started. This event is being recorded and will be available on the University Bookstore YouTube channel in 2 to 3 days. So make sure to let folks know in case they missed it. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A field for the end of the discussion portion, not in the chat. There's a little tab button down there that says Q&A. Just click on that and you'll be able to give us your questions. And now I'll turn things over to JP and Ray.
Thank you, Dan. So welcome, JP. I wish we were doing this actually in person, but of course, right? We're almost there. We're like at the last stretch of this.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna start with, again, sort of like, how did you, besides Twitter, because I know you love Twitter.
Yeah.
How else did you sort of live through this pandemic? And what else did you do to keep yourself occupied?
I'm not even sure that I did it the right way, because for me, I was just like, okay, there's no way out but through. So I've just been very like deep in my routines. I set my little rituals for myself every day. Like I have to wake up at a certain time. I walk outside, go get my coffee. That's me getting my fresh air for the morning, come back, sit at my computer, do whatever I need to do. It's been very repetitious. It's been very monotonous. Because I was like, yeah, I'm just going to wait the whole thing out and emerge at some point. And I'm slowly starting to get back to life. And it feels like being on psychedelic drugs, just like being outside and seeing people. It's just wild.
How are you returning back into sort of engaging with other people that maybe you hadn't in a while? Any favorite person that you wanted to see that you hadn't not seen because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I had a little park birthday with some friends who I hadn't seen in a long time. And I'd been in contact with a couple of my very close friends before that, but there's something to be said about all those people who you really love, but we just haven't been able to see. And maybe you don't keep in touch every day because you don't text like that and you don't talk like that. But it's the people who kind of are hanging out at the same events that you do sometimes, and you get to see them and reunite with them. And it just felt so good. I really missed that genre of person, like who you get to just catch up with, be familiar with, be friendly. Maybe they're not your best friends, but it was like, oh my God, this feels so like such an excess, such a luxury to be around people like that again.
Yeah. And now that brings me to wonder, like, where's your hangout spot? Because I know, right, for different parts of the LGBTQ community, I would say the club scene and the gay scene, right, and gay life, right, sort of revolves around being in queer spaces. Oftentimes, right, you have to be 21, and it's typically a bar. And so I'm just curious, where do you like to hang out? Where do you meet these sort of casual friends that you constantly see at the similar types of activities that you do?
So I haven't gone clubbing, and I really didn't go clubbing much before the pandemic, but there is this bar in Brooklyn called the Rosemont, and I'm there all the time. If I'm out and with friends in Brooklyn, we're probably at the Rosemont. But I'm from Oklahoma, so I really enjoy the house party scene, because back in Oklahoma, it was like we didn't really have a whole lot of gay bars, so we would just go to each other's houses and host things there. And it's been kind of cool to see that come back a little bit. I've noticed that more people are having like stuff on their roof, stuff in the big apartments. And I love that. I don't know if that was happening before the pandemic or they're just newly popular again because maybe some bars still aren't hosting everyone, but I really enjoy that scene. I went to a couple of those over the past week. It's been great. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, I feel very much the same way. I'm not gonna lie. I personally love the club scene, but it was because of, I realized it was always people that you could talk to, you can engage with, that had very much your similar type of interest, or that you engage with, initially with this one particular thing, which is, gay culture or queer culture, right? In a gay club. But then it was like getting to know all these individuals, right? On a deeper level. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
So that brings me to sort of your book, and you have a number of different stories that you sort of bring up and topics that you talk about. Like, tell me a little bit about some of the inspiration for each of those stories. Like, how did you come to, like, this needs to be part of the book and this is why, right? And potentially, which ones did you like let go of? Like, which ones did you put in the book?
So when I was first putting the book together, I knew that I didn't want it just to be a collection of things that have happened to me, because that's very loose and it doesn't really conspire to make a really collective point or meaning. I knew I wanted to have a story with kind of a beginning, middle, and end, one where at least all the chapters came together to say something, to really make a point about how I see life, how I see the stories that we tell ourselves. And so each chapter, I would say, has a lot to do with this idea of memory being an act of creative writing. So every time we remember something, we don't really have CCTV footage in our brains that can sort of point to exactly what happened. What we have is sort of our recollection of what happened. And when we're recalling things, we are sort of creating something because, again, we can't perfectly remember something. And so if we are storytellers in the act of remembering things, then maybe there's more agency than we thought when we're bringing ourselves back into memories that affect our lives to this day. So a lot of them have to do with, how I see my sexuality, how I see my relationship to trauma, how I see my relationship to my culture. And the idea is that all these things can be looked at differently and can be turned on their heads and rearranged. And in doing so, I can get things out of them that I didn't get before. So it sort of is like, if there was a story that didn't fit that theme, then I just couldn't use it. And it's kind of sad because there were some stories that I wanted to tell, but I just couldn't find my way in for this particular project.
What were some of those stories where you couldn't sort of make them fit into this?
One was definitely the guy that I first started dating after I was out. He was just this really annoying kind of like show tunes type guy. And we spent like a few months together. And I just remember being so aggrieved by him. I just couldn't stand him, but I was with him for that long because I was like, okay, because he was being nice to me. He would take me out on dinners and he would give me gifts every now and then. And to me, that's sort of what affection was supposed to be, because in my experience of being with more closeted guys, I obviously didn't get that experience of someone like holding my hand out in public or showing me off or anything like that. And I thought that was really novel. And I thought that he was kind of the textbook definition of a gentleman because he was being so kind in his words and his actions. But on closer inspection, he wasn't that kind. He wasn't that good. It's just that I was being fooled by those things. So it's very much a story that I wanted to tell, just about how we can't be fooled by the overt gestures of kindness, because seeming like you're kind is not the same thing as being kind.
Right. You also, in the book, you definitely talk about, again, all different types of identity. And I would say identity is really at the core of what is being spoken to in the book. Tell me about what would you say to people that feel maybe that they have a late start on gay life or queer life? Because I know that you touched on one of the stories specifically around that. So I want to hear from you, like, what do you tell these people? Because in some ways that was you.
Yeah. I think one thing I try to communicate with the book is that identity is a very fluid thing. We don't sort of begin a new one each time we decide something new about ourselves. So for example, with the Mexican American chapter, with the gay chapter, I take a great deal of time to establish that, you know, I was something before I came out. I was something before I realized I was some sort of cultural other. That was very much still part of my experience. It's just that the way I thought about it changed, the name I put to it changed, my understanding of it changed. And so what I would say is that at any age, at any given moment, your understanding of yourself can change. And that goes for me too. I know I wrote a whole book about kind of describing what I think I am and how I think identity works, but I too will probably see myself completely differently with new experiences, with new information. And so I wouldn't think of it as getting a late start. I would just think of it as being a human and accessing a different way of looking at yourself and a different way of living your life. And that's something that's going to be happening as long as you are alive. So if you just think of it as part of one process instead of all this pressure, like, oh, I wish I'd come out sooner, or I wish I had lived my life differently in the past, that it's all part of the ongoing conversation you have with yourself and the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Sort of around the same theme, you talk about imposter syndrome and sort of how you sort of dealt through that in different aspects, right? Through, again, your journey growing up. And I want to hear a little bit about just kind of how do you continue to deal with that? And also what are some potential affirmations that you have for yourself and that you want to share with others?
Yeah, so with this book, I realized that what I could do was offer my little piece of the mosaic, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. It's still a part of the bigger picture, and it's still very much contributing to the conversation about, you know, what it means to be gay, what it means to be Chicano, what it means to be anyone, a person. But I was so obsessed in the past with making my little piece look a certain way and having it be a certain way because I thought that that would make it more of a valid thing. I thought that would make it more of a real thing. And what I'm realizing now is that no matter how creative I get with it, I can't just alter it to fit what I would like it to be. I have to sort of make peace with what it is and how it operates. And so for me, it's just sort of like what I've experienced, how I see it, that's good enough. And it's gonna have to be. So if anyone else sees it like as being inauthentic, if anyone else sees it as being, you know, not quite meeting the criteria, I just know that's not true because it is authentic. It's my life. I've lived it. So I'm just way less interested lately in trying to bill myself as something and more interested in just making peace with the fact that, you know, this is who I am. I know what my history is. I know what my lived experiences are. And I feel comfortable talking about them and presenting them to the world. And I think in doing that, we can sort of share with each other what everyone else's experiences look like and how my life might look different from someone else's. And I think that that's more important than having the biggest, flashiest, shiniest piece to contribute to the community conversation.
Right. Yeah, I was, as I was prepping for this interview, I went through your Twitter and I realized how just how genuine you are, you know, in terms of engaging with the audience or with readers. And it was really interesting to me to see sort of you constantly engage with a lot of people. And since the book came out, there's been a lot of buzz around it. There's been a lot of billboards, all kinds of different sort of attention. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about your work being recognized and then, you know, sort of putting your life on display for everyone to...
Yeah, it's very surreal, I guess, just addressing the buzz around it. Like when I was getting all the media around it and doing a bunch of interviews and stuff for different outlets, my brain was completely turned off because one thing I'm really scared about doing, I'm scared of being tricked by reality into thinking that I am a bigger deal than I actually am, because I do think that like I'm just a person and there's a very equal likely alternate universe where I didn't get any of that attention for my book and it was the same book. And I know how I would have felt about that. I would have felt like, oh God, I wrote a bad book. It wasn't worth it. So I'm trying to affirm to myself that, you know, my opinion of the book also matters, whether it got attention or not, whether people liked it or not. I have to like it at the end of the day, or else none of it matters. It's sort of like, you know, if everyone loves your book and you don't, then you just feel like you're peddling a product instead of something that has heart and blood in it. But in terms of putting my life on display, I sort of feel like uh, it doesn't quite feel that way, because for me, this book is so engineered that whenever you're writing, when you're composing something, there is like a musical element to it where you're trying to hit emotional peaks and valleys, and you're trying to sort of not manipulate someone's emotions, but certainly conduct them in a way where it's like, you know, I want someone to laugh, I want someone to cry, I want someone to feel warmth, I want them to feel understood here. And so there are all those beats that I was hitting, and to me, that is a different thing than the actual biological truth of my experiences, because I can't replicate those. I can't put those in a book. It almost feels like it's not quite me. It is my artistic representation of me. And so I feel pretty safe in that way. Like if somebody feels like they didn't like a chapter in the book, I don't take that as like you disliked an experience I had that traumatized me and you disliked me talking about it. It's just like it is to an extent an object, a literary product, and that sort of shields me in a way.
Yeah. One of the stories you focus on sort of your reclaiming your Mexicanidad, right?
Mhm.
Your Mexicanness or your biculturalness, right? To an extent. Um, tell me more about that. Like, how do you do that today? Because I know in the story that was provided in the book was very specific to young you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, and I'm sure other people are too. How do you do that today as an adult?
Yeah, it is something that when I was younger felt so immediate and so urgent, because I was still very much in proximity to my abuelos, who were living a very different life than I was at that time. My abuelo, who's still with us, still is to this day, but you know, there was a life that was very much not just shaped by being racialized, but sort of class, you know, not having any money, not having access to any resources. And so that to me growing up was what being Mexican was about. I didn't know any Mexican families that had money. I didn't know any Mexican families that were from comfort. And when you're young, you think that the whole world is what you see. It's just like, it's what you know. So the whole world must be like this. And so as I've gotten older and I've traveled a lot more and I've learned more about, you know, the history of different cultures, different nations, different governments, I certainly identify less with anything that might smack of, I don't know what you would call it, like nationalism of some kind, because, you know, I've never identified myself with that in the United States, but I certainly did in the past, probably before I wrote this book. I didn't identified with a certain Chicano nationalism, I guess you would call it, or a Mexican nationalism. It took me a while growing up before I realized, like, well, that's not great either, because you know I don't exist to sort of uphold a system like that, even if it's one that looks different than the one that I find so unappealing in the United States. So nowadays, I try to think of it more as an action rather than an identity. I try to be there for members of my community. I try to help people where I can. I try to uplift people where I can, because that to me is a little bit more important. But in terms of who I am, I think I'm pretty at peace with it. I think I've finally been like, okay, I get it. I'm okay with it. It's fine.
That's good. Thank you. And tell me, is there anything from your past and growing up in rural Oklahoma that you want to share with us? Like, what is one thing that you really enjoyed? Because I know, you know, I think there was a sort of an evolution as to how you thought about living there,
Yeah.
right? From the beginning part of the book towards the end. And so I want to hear a little bit about that.
One thing I love about rural Oklahoma, and I guess maybe rural places all around the world are like this, but there's such an emphasis on storytelling, whether that takes the form of gossip or chisme. You know, it's like there's always this idea of like illustrating your neighbors' lives to each other and meeting up with each other. And the way that people would talk to each other was so illustrated and so detailed, and they would often like go into the little voices of the other person because everyone knows each other and everyone's bored, so like what else are you going to do? There's this real emphasis on making it kind of funny, on lightly joking about other people, about, and you see that reflected too in a lot of like country music that comes out of Oklahoma. Like Reba is probably one of our biggest country music stars come out of Oklahoma, and the way she writes song lyrics is familiar to me. It's very like, it's simple, it's accessible, it's straightforward, but it has a lot of personality. I think that affected me quite a bit, and I'm very grateful for it because I was so bored growing up. We were like in the country, we had nothing but fields everywhere, a lot of nature, not a lot of people, and that does something to you. It does something to the way you see yourself and the way you live your life. And I'm really grateful for it. Now that I live in a city, I get to be double grateful for it because I don't have to also still be in the countryside.
Do you miss having the big spaces? Because New York is.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I will say that whenever I visit, I have a wonderful sleep because it's so quiet and it's so dark, and you can actually see the stars at night. And sometimes you'll hear the coyotes, or sometimes you'll hear the owls. And that's really nice. It's really peaceful. It's really calming. I do miss that quite a bit, but I know that you can't have both worlds. Like I can't have that and also have like, I don't know, Trader Joe's. So it's rough. It's rough.
Was there, because I know some of I mean, there's only so much you can pack into the book, right? And so I'm curious to know which of the stories that are in the book would you have wanted to expand on, and like what would that
be? I would expand on all of them if I could, just because I enjoy detail. I enjoy going down little story rabbit holes. I enjoy sort of like describing things that don't really need to be described, but I'm aware that that's something that I get dinged on in my past writing sometimes, where I'm just talking about something and having a great time, and then someone will be like, what is this about? And it's like, I don't know, I was just describing something. Like, what about it? I learned very early to kill my darlings, and I'm not really super petty or precious about them. Like if my editor's like, I think this part needs to go, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine. If it moves lighter, that's fine. Because I needed this book to move very light because I knew it was my debut. I knew that I wanted it to be almost hyper accessible. I wanted people to be able to read it very easily. But I think as I, grow more comfortable in my own artistic pursuits, I would like to pack in a lot of those more lush details that I enjoy so much. So basically any story in this book, there's a bunch of details that I could have added. I could have really colored in the world. I could have described more outfits. That was one reaction I had when I was reading it, because I love describing clothes. And I was like, you could have talked about what this person was wearing here. It's like, yeah, I could have.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely essential to, part of this story that you're telling, right? So
yeah.
That's definitely something that I definitely related to, and that I saw a lot of details, but it's definitely a very easy book to read.
Yeah.
I personally appreciate it. I wanna just kind of pause for a second and see if there's somebody from the audience that has a question. Hopefully we can get some of that.
Yeah, we did get someone just kind of right now who asked which of the stories in the book was the hardest to write and why?
I would say the most difficult chapter to write was the how to disagree with who you used to be chapter. And that's the one that details my experiences with Carlos, who I met in a sort of group therapy setting. And it does deal with, issues of mental health, sexual assault, but what made it more difficult for me, because the thing is, when I write about something, it means that I'm pretty comfortable with it. It means that I've settled on my story about it, and I can just sort of make of it whatever I want to. So I didn't feel like I was re-traumatizing myself. I more was just aware that there were ongoing, very contemporary conversations going on around, consent, around the Me Too movement, around reevaluating past experiences and looking at them and being like, was that actually okay? Did I actually consent to that? And anytime that I have to navigate subjects like that are still so ongoing and sensitive, I do get worried because I don't want to say the wrong thing, especially on such a sensitive topic. What I don't want to do is sort of make someone believe that their experiences aren't their own to make their judgment on. In presenting my own, I don't want to be like, here's the blueprint for how you should look at it yourself. I'm not saying that. And I also know that the limited vocabulary there, I like putting in a lot of nuance, but I didn't want to put in so much nuance that it was like almost erasing my status as someone who had something bad happen to them. So in other words, when I talk about having desires for Carlos, when I talk about wanting to be around Carlos, when I talk about not removing myself from Carlos's orbit, even though I knew that things weren't working out, I don't ever want that to be translated as like, and that's why I deserve what happened to me. And I know that other people have similar thoughts in their heads, like, oh, if I had just broken up with him earlier, if I had just not stayed the night that one time, if I had not just been drinking, that's really scary. And I don't ever want to make someone feel unsafe inside my book in that way. So that was difficult because I had sort of a tightrope to walk, because I also didn't want to just remove all mentions of the fact that I did have motives, I did have desires, and I did have appetites that were at play. I still wanted to describe those. So yeah, it was hard. But I'm glad that it came out the way it did. I reread it and I was like, yeah, I think that was the tone that I wanted to strike.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that were in the chat?
Just one more at the moment. It's a question about, you are writing about real life people. How as an author do you kind of manage, I guess they're asking, how do you manage the fact that you're talking about real life people, accurately portraying them in the book, and are you kind of did you have any trepidation that they might recognize themselves in your writing and either take issue or kind of come at you, or want to discuss what their side of the story was?
There are a few elements to that. The first one being that there were some people who I reached out to beforehand and was like, hey, I'm going to be writing this thing. I just want you to know, do you want to talk about it? Didn't do that with everyone, because it would be really impractical to do that with some of the characters in my book, because some of them, as I detail, some really horrible things have happened between us. But there's also the process of trying to change someone's name, trying to change someone's appearances and stuff like that. But the thing is, I come from such a small town. I come from such a small little place in the world that if anyone from that town reads my book, they're gonna pretty much know who I'm talking about, which was a really scary thing. The only one that I was truly concerned about was the Corey chapter that sort of documents my closeted relationship with my high school best friend. We sort of, quote unquote, got together for 4+ years. And it was a really turbulent, really difficult relationship, one that involved a lot of gray areas in terms of sexuality, in terms of like how he identified, in terms of what he wanted in me and from me, and vice versa. And I was really afraid, because I didn't think I could just not write about that big chunk of my life, because it was such a huge part of my time on this planet. But at the same time, I was afraid that he would read it and think that I was trying to, prescribe him a sexuality or out him in some way, or, put his business out there. I was so worried sick. And then he texted me the other day and he was just like, haha, bro, read that chapter about me. That was good times, brought back good memories, LOL. And I was like, okay. Like, okay, right, you're a cartoon. I forgot.
I personally love that story, because I think you're shining a light, right, on such a topic, right, which is people who don't want to associate with the community, right, with the LGBTQ community as a whole. And you're sort of normalizing that, right? And personally, I think for a lot of us who are gay and who are, I would say, visibly gay, right? We navigate this world sort of like knowing of like, oh, here's potentially somebody who could be closeted, or, or whatever it might be. And so I really appreciate that, because I think you're sort of normalizing that. And again, you hinted at this bigger picture. And so I'm curious to know, are there any cool stories around, right, sort of these characters that you've engaged with throughout the years that you want to share with us?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, especially the Corey chapter, like that one could have been a whole book just because we spent so much time together and there was so much that happened between us. But I would say being from rural Oklahoma, a lot of my early, I wouldn't call them relationships, but they're not quite as minuscule as encounters. But whatever you would call them, a lot of them involved men who were in the closet, men who were questioning, men who weren't quite sure, what was going on around here. And that was a really interesting place to be mentally for me, because I think it did sort of impact how I saw myself and how I saw sexuality and how I saw the world around me, because there were so many people who, and still to this day, so many people who um, don't feel like they can come out, who don't feel like they want to associate with the community, who don't feel like they are in a safe place to do so. I remember that horrible, annoying first guy idea that I was telling about earlier. He actually took me to my first gay bar, and it's called Tramps in Oklahoma City. And there's this area outside in the courtyard where you can stand on this concrete bench and you can look over into this place called the Havana Inn, which is a hotel for predominantly like gay men, but also predominantly closeted gay men. So people would go there, they would rent a room. A lot of them are truckers, so they're already away from their families, and they'll spend a night there, and they'll just sort of like cruise around, like knock on each other's doors, sort of present themselves. And if the guy likes what he sees, he'll open the door. And this was just like a very regular ritual in Oklahoma City. Like you could see this happen on any given night if you went to Tramps. And I remember that guy showing me it for the first time, and I was really interested in that scene, in the way that the men moved and the way that they sort of engaged in this like display ritual of like, hey, here I am, do you like what you see? The whole like sort of predetermined moves they would make about knocking on the door, stepping inside. It was really, really interesting. And I wanted to write about that as well, but I didn't find space for it. But Oklahoma is very much awash in stories like that. Everywhere.
Right. Is that your second book? I don't know.
It kind of is. I have been working. I'm hesitant to call it my second book. I think it's going to be a little bit more fictional. And I'm still waiting to make sure that it does want to be my second book. I'm just sort of throwing words into the Google document and seeing if they stick and seeing if they cohere into something. But it's about my real world, almost first boyfriend, where it was like right after I came out. So right after the events of the Corey chapter in my real life, where I met this guy at a house party, my very first gay house party in this town called Geronimo, which has like, I don't know, 200 people living in it. And I didn't know there were any gay people in that area, but it was my friend who took me. And I just sort of want to recount what rural life can look like, what queer rural life can look like. And my best friend who lived it all with me, he's a Black gay man and I'm a Mexican American man. And I think it would be interesting just to show people like in rural parts of Oklahoma that we kind of exist. You know what I mean? Like we're out here, we're living lives in the backdrop of everything. And I don't see, the rural part's very important to me because I don't see a whole lot of that in literature, in media, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. So in one of the chapters you mentioned sort of this, the 2018 2008 elections, sort of the conversation that you were having with your grandma around them as in white people, and then also them as in undocumented people, which is, my community.
Yeah.
Just curious to hear a little bit more about like, how do you see yourself, kind of like, what's your perspective on again, on sort of those different parts of identity, and then, around some of this political stuff, right? That has been here for generations.
Yeah, it really helped me learn just how complicated things are, because for as difficult as my abuelos' lives were, they were at the end of the day documented, and it did make our lives that much easier, especially like for my mom and for me. There's some members of my family who are undocumented, and I know for a fact that they've had to approach life very differently, and they've had different challenges put to them. And when I worked at the tortilla factory, most of the workers around me were also undocumented. And so it really did just bring into focus for me that there's more to this idea of Mexican identity than just being Mexican. Like, there's more to it. There's, you know, there's colorism, there's citizenship, there is gender, there is anything you can think of. It interacts with every possible way that you can be a person in this world. And I think that that was one of the big eye openers for me, because, you know, the people who I worked with could only take certain jobs, and they were getting paid a lot less than everyone else was, because they knew that they couldn't really self-advocate. They couldn't really say, like, I want to be paid more, because they're being paid off the books. They're being exploited. And I think that was really formative for me. And it's something that I learned very early. And the idea of, you know, around the 2008 election, the idea that anyone who was of Mexican descent was undocumented or a quote unquote illegal alien, just that narrative being applied to anyone who is of Mexican heritage was something that I didn't really wrap my brain around until later in life, because I think that the big proud response from my mom would be like, well, I was born here, you know, like that sort of thing. And I didn't realize until later that it's like, yeah, but that shouldn't matter. You know what I mean? Because what if you weren't? That doesn't mean that you wouldn't be entitled to humanity, to dignity, to any of the things that people say that you shouldn't have. So yeah, it was very educational for me. And I sort of talk in that chapter about how education can sometimes come at the expense of people who are already exploited. So this idea that it was Federico's job or Javier's job to sort of get me on the same page about these things while also trying to make a living for his kids. You know what I mean? I did try to sort of paint myself as someone who was a little bit clueless and who was leaning on people who already had way too many people leaning on.
Yeah. Now it's Pride Month, so I'm curious to hear, how are you celebrating Pride Month besides, right, doing this amazing book tour and sort of getting all of this attention around it, which again, I think many of us deeply appreciate that, because a lot of the stories that you touched on are incredible and really reflective of the diversity of the community. But how are you celebrating Pride this year besides the tour?
How am I? I'm definitely going to celebrate, like, once I feel like this book is safely out into the world, and I still feel like it isn't. I feel like people are still getting used to it or meeting it or reading it. And I'm interested to see people's reactions to it. Once that sort of passes, I really just want to relax. Like, two friends of mine, we're going to a cabin in Maine for a week, and that's going to be really fun for me. I'm very low key. I just like taking it easy. I would still like to have a little book party, because, you know, everything was very much virtual right when it came out last week, but we're starting to be like, okay, maybe we can do some things. So I want to have a little outdoor party for my book. And as far as just Pride stuff, I mean, I'm sure I'll see some friends, go to a house party or two. That's all I do for Pride. Ever since I started working in media, Pride for me has been like, oh my God, it's go time. I have work to do.
Yeah, it sounds like that a lot. So, I mean, I hope, you know, we'd love to have you here in Seattle if you are interested in having a little outdoor gathering of
Oh my
some
God, absolutely. I would love that.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to share with us today about, like, your book, upcoming work? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I would say about this book that it was a book that I definitely created while working a lot of other jobs at the same time. So in the, like, how to describe a dick chapter, sort of touch on that, like being in the freelance mindset and like working for a bunch of different writing gigs all at once. So this was a book that I created, you know, between coffee breaks, between doing one task than the other. And I'm really interested, and I'm hoping that this book can sort of give this to me, in having the opportunity to make something sort of without all the distractions that come with just trying to make it and trying to make enough money for rent and trying to make enough money to make ends meet. I want to have time for my next book, and I want to have whole days where I can just sit and write, and maybe the book will be worse. I don't know. Like maybe I just really shine when there's a lot of pressure on me, and that's like where I need to be. But then I'll know, you know. It'll be fun to find out, because this whole process for me has taught me a lot about just how difficult it is to get published. And then once you get published, in getting that book out into the world, I do feel like, you know, I'm not downplaying my talent or anything, but I kind of had to roll the dice in a correct way several times to arrive at this book, and to have all the people who are behind it actually put resources behind it. Because I think one of the reasons so many people know about this book is because they actually gave me a team whose job it was to get it out in front of people. And for that to happen, for a book like this, telling the kind of stories that it tells with the kind of characters in it that I detail, that definitely isn't lost on me. And it's something that I feel both very grateful for, but also very frustrated with, because I think, yeah, but there's so many people who are similar to me, or who are dealing with things that are more difficult than the things I've dealt with, who just can't get published because they don't have the coffee break time, they don't have the resources, they don't have the support to actually put a book together, to actually get it in front of someone, and for those people to actually try their best to get it in front of other people. So I'm hoping that I can use this book as my next step, and wherever I go, I want to make sure that I can somehow help people get where they need to go in the publishing world, and sort of maybe help them get their books out. If that's just giving advice, if that's sort of just trying to hook them up with an agent, I don't know what that looks like really, but I want to do it because I mean, my goodness, I I feel like I'm a very privileged person, and this was very hard for me, so I can only imagine.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there, I want to go back to the audience and see if there's any other questions that
Yeah, we've got a few.
Okay.
So JP, what were the authors or books or films that informed you or influenced, I guess, writing this book specifically, is what one of the people want to know.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, my mom was really obsessed with David Sedaris. She was an English teacher. She's still with us, but she's retired. She was very keen on me being a writer and an artist, which is very lucky on my end. That's exactly what I wanted to do. So she always had books lying around, and she would always read to me when I was a kid. And usually in a Mexican family, if you say like, I want to be an artist, they'll be like, can't you do something that makes more money? Can't you like be a little more practical? But my mom was very supportive of me to that end. And one of the first books she gave me when I could actually read was a David Sedaris books, which was an essay collection. And it was humorous. And I think that really let me know, like, okay, I can write little stories and entertain people in this way. And that was very foundational to me. In terms of like what actually influences me beyond, because I think it does matter what influences me beyond the scope of the book, because I don't really read things with the intention of like, I need to put this into a book somehow, or I need to use this as inspiration or material. My main influence would really be, I think, Alice Munro, who is this Canadian author, and she writes short stories and she does psychological realism. So she writes a lot about what's going through someone's head at any given moment, and why they do the things they do, and what their motives look like. And she really draws the colors and shapes of people's feelings and thoughts. I just love writing like that. I turn back to her whenever I feel lost on the page, because she just, writing when it's at its best feels like it's supplying you with a vocabulary that you always needed to describe things that you didn't know how to before. And that's really how her writing makes me feel. So I would say she's my biggest person on that front. But I'm also just such a magpie. Like, I'll just pick everything that I can read. If it's just out and about on the internet, if it catches my eye, I'll read it. And a lot of that comes from authors whose names I don't even remember, but they impact me quite heavily, because when I find a little nugget of something, I just keep it for life.
Well, I mean, based on that, do you keep a common book? Do you have a journal that you write all those down?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm terrible with, my journal is full of all sorts of stray lines. My notes app is a war zone on my phone. Like, sometimes I'll just be running and I'll have to stop and be like, okay, that sounds good. Sometimes they don't make sense really. Sometimes it's just words sitting next to each other that sort of feel pleasant in conversation with each other, in each other's company. Yes, I write one thing in my notes app probably at least once a day. Yeah, I love doing that.
along those lines, you mentioned, this is another question from the audience. How does your visual art influence your writing, if at all?
I think it does, in as much as like I'm always just sort of trying to indulge the itch, and sometimes that looks like a drawing, sometimes that looks like writing. I try not to separate the two too much. As long as I feel like doing it, then that's a sign that I should do it, I think. And that's really cool about my lifestyle right now, because it's something that I wouldn't have been able to do even just a year ago when I was doing a bunch of different jobs. So nowadays, if it's like, oh, this drawing just popped into my head, I can just make that drawing happen because I don't have a million other obligations. So that's how I prefer to live. And it took me 30 years to get there, but here I am. So I'm really interested in seeing what I come up with next. Because yeah, I don't really think like, okay, today's my drawing day, today's my writing day. It's more just like, whatever I feel like doing today, I should probably do it. And they do use different parts of my brain for sure. I think drawing is more soothing than writing. Writing is like me talking to myself, which can get frustrating. But drawing is sort of a very mechanical sort of activity. You're putting something together, you're physically conjuring something, which I think feels a little bit more productive some days. But yeah, they have a lot to do with each other.
What was the one thing you cut from the book that you wish could have made it into the final cut?
So the original How to Lose a Rabbit chapter, which now I think is the most standout chapter in it, also visually speaking, because it has the rabbit on the cover, it has the rabbit in the author photo, and the rabbits become the motif for everything, which is great, and I love that. But the original title for it was How to Outrun a Goose, because in reality, when I revisited my middle school and I looked for the rabbit and couldn't find the rabbit, an actual living goose descended from the ceiling and started chasing me, and I sort of had to run away from it. And I thought that was so funny, because what I got out of that experience from a literary perspective is that, like, you know, all this time you were thinking about this school as this big bad, and some bird was making a nest in it, because that's just what animals do. They don't really care. They don't really see this building as anything important. And maybe they have a wiser take on the nature of this building than you do, because they see it as something that it's just a building. I can build a nest here. I can leave once my egg is hatched, whatever. And I had this whole description of running away from this friggin' goose that was really funny and interesting. But my editor raised a good point, which is that, like, this is too many animals in one chapter. I had the rabbit, and then I had the goose, and I was like, yeah, you're right. Let's just keep the spotlight on the rabbit. But the goose is still very funny to me, and I find them to be funny animals in general. So maybe there'll be some bonus cut with the goose.
Didn't they do some of the bonus cuts with David Sedaris's works? I feel like
I would love to do that. I'm going to reinsert the goose. If this book does well, I'm going to just be like, okay, the new special edition Olapapi has a new chapter and the goose is back.
Given that you live in Brooklyn now, could you ever see yourself moving back to Oklahoma or a more rural community someday?
I think if I move back to Oklahoma, I would have to move to like Tulsa or something, which Tulsa is making a really big push lately. Their art scene is getting bigger, and they're putting a lot more resources behind their parks and their efforts to make it a city you'd want to visit. And I think that's really cool. I visited there a few years ago, and it was really nice, actually. I don't think I could ever go back to living where I'm from, just because I would lose my mind. I was bored then, and I would be more bored now. Love to visit. In terms of like moving to a different rural community, if I had a husband, I guess, and we had for some reason dedicated ourselves to gardening or something, like, yeah, I would do it in that case. But and then I could write my little books from a cottage or something. That'd be cool. But I don't see that happening for me anytime soon. But who knows what will happen? I'm a very impulsive person. I really thought I was going to move to Austin, Texas a couple months ago. I was so certain. I was like, God, I'm going to have to put everything in boxes. I'm going to have to figure out how much money it would cost. I was going through all the like mechanics of it. And then at the end, I was like, whoa, okay, no, wait, no, I'm not doing that. So who knows? Who knows where I'll end up?
I don't need great barbecue that badly.
Why were you going to move to Austin?
So I thought it would be cool to be closer to my family, so I could take a short like plane ride or a long-ish car ride back to them. but also my whole family is really Tex-Mex. So I feel very comfortable with Texas. I feel kind of at home with the weather, with the food. And Austin has that like middle ground feeling of like, it's a city, but it's in Texas, but it has barbecue and it has Mexican stuff. So I was into that. And I spent a lot of time in Austin, as my book can attest, where bad things keep happening to me there. But yeah, I was just utterly convinced. But then this was before New York had really reopened anything. And then I started seeing some of my friends again, and I was like, oh, I have roots here. I can't just leave. I don't want to meet new people. So I decided to stay.
In the movie adaptation, who do you cast as JP? Can't say yourself.
I had this really unhinged pitch that I was semi-serious about to someone who was interested in making it into a TV show. I was like, what if it's just this really avant-garde artistic thing where Edward James Olmos plays everyone, like plays me, plays my mom, plays my abuelo. It's like the one-man show, but it's called Hola Papi. You know, the only living Mexican-American actor in the world, Edward James Olmos. But I was also like, it would be really cool if Selma Hayek played everyone, or if she played me. We're very similar in many ways. But I don't know. It'll probably be some, you know, like, you know how Netflix just seems to generate these like really smooth face actors with like 500,000 Instagram followers. You've never seen them before in your life, but suddenly they're just like the star of this show. It'll be someone like that. I'm certain. I'm so certain it'll be someone like that.
What are some of your other favorite Mexican American either books or movies? You're just saying works here, so they kind of want to know.
Stand and Deliver was really important to me and my family. I had to watch that all the time. That's also
testifying from the Edward James Olmos.
And then the other movie is Selena, so also featuring Edward James Olmos. There are like 5 of us. But yeah, Stand and Deliver, Selena, those were 2 big ones, obviously. They were the ones that I watched growing up as a kid. As far as just like Mexican American stuff, you know, Michoacana Meat Market, pretty iconic. I don't know if they have that in Seattle, but it's just like, it's just the Mexican meat market, and you go there and you see everyone that you know and everyone from the funeral that you went to last month, and you just sort of chit chat and you ask for cuts of bacon. And then just like, I don't know, see, my mom raised me in a very specific way where like a lot of the things she liked were very influenced by like the 80s. And she just loved disco, and she loved like Diana Ross, and she loved just that whole genre of stuff. So I feel like I grew up with a lot of that kind of music and a lot of that kind of cultural influences, more so than I did Chicano stuff, because that was stuff that my grandparents would show me every once in a while. But I spent most of my time with my mom. We did have like mariachis, that was big for us. God, we just need more Mexican American things, you know? We need more movies, we need more books, we need more than like Bless Me Ultima and Selena.
Have you seen the Selena Netflix series?
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah. The wigs in that show are so out of control. I was just like, I don't know when I think Selena, I automatically think like that wig. It's just not the first thing that comes to mind, but you know, no accounting for taste.
Well, that looks like that kind of dries up all the questions. Any last minute ones coming through? Doesn't look like it. So I'm just gonna bring this to a close. Thank you, JP and Ray, for stopping by and celebrating Hola Papi with us, and donating your time tonight. And a huge thank you to our audience today for spending the hour with us, and a good book. You may purchase copies of Hola Papi through University Bookstore. We have book plates that JP signed for us, so we thank you for that. And you can join us on our website, social media, or sign up for emails to hear more about upcoming events. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.